Okay, what's up? We're back again with some M plus VOD review. Been a while since I've done one of these, you know. I wasn't really doing a lot of dungeons last season. Moonkin, not the best. So, but instead, we're back again. We're doing some more M plus VOD review. Today I'm going to be showcasing a Gambit 27. Tazvesh Gambit, not one of the new dungeons in this seasonal affix, but tomorrow I should also have an upload of like a Grimrail 24 that I'm going to be recording like right after this. So I'm going to have some more content for you guys as well. But basically, what we're going to be going over with this Gambit is just kind of like some of the routing decisions that we were making in this key, some of my cooldown management just as a Moonkin, and kind of how to play this dungeon as a Druid. I've had a lot of people showing up in my stream asking me questions about like some of the things that I'm doing as balance in dungeons, and I just kind of wanted to talk through like some of the most important concepts that you need to know as like a Moonkin through some of these keys. So right off the rip, what am I playing? I'm playing Venthyr. I'm playing it with like standard AoE talents with Trees, Soul of the Forest, Twin Moons, and Fury of Elune. I really like Twin Moons with basically this kind of setup because it feels like it, like with the ability to spend more astral power that you're gaining from your foreset, you're able to do a lot more. I'm also running the Orb of Torment trinket from Ner'zhul, which gives you a lot of mastery on use, and so it's like a font of power style effect. And in addition to that, I'm also running the Deteriorated Construct core trinket, which you're going to see in a little bit. It's that like trinket that shoots out these blue orbs. So with that being said, right off the rip here, I don't want to be with this pack in particular. Like, you would want to pre-dot this pack, but I've been having issues where like I would be like ripping threat while the tank is trying to group the pack up, and so instead of like pre-dotting, I'm just going to go into this pack and rip my CDs as fast as possible, and then I'm also going to be potioning. From here on out, I'm going to be focusing a lot of my damage into the Goliath, because I know like the Survival Hunter and the Fire Mage, as you can see on like the damage meter, they're going to be able to take care of like a large amount of the AoE. For me, I'm going to be maintaining a Starfall, but I'm going to be largely just ramping on this Goliath. And with just while ramping on the Goliath here, it's going to allow the most difficult mob in this dungeon, especially on Sanguine Grievous, to be killed off. Because at higher levels, especially on like the 27 level, if he's going to get like 3 or 4 stomps off, you're going to be in deep trouble. Right here, we're able to kill it off before the second stomp even goes off, or the third stomp even goes off. And so that's actually really, really good for us, because we were worried. You saw me even go bear form. We popped a GS. Let's just talk about a little bit of cooldown management here on the stomps as well. So especially at higher levels. So you see me getting leapt on early. There is a world where I probably should have popped Ursul's Vortex before I was getting leapt on before the first stomp. And that would have allowed me to avoid having to like pop Barkskin as early as I did, and then like having to maybe like shift bear or take the AMZ for the second one. But this is about cooldown management. So I noticed very early that I'm incredibly scared. So I pop Barkskin on the first stomp, because I noticed that I'm getting comboed with the leaps. And so after that, I'm like, okay, so for the second stomp, I'm pretty scared here, but I do get that AMZ on me right at the last second. I do know that I have enough natural avoidance to be able to also live it, assuming that I'm topped. And so I may commit like a health potion. I do commit the health potion after wave jumpers leap out on top of me, because like that's a point where I can also potentially go down. So I end up committing that health potion. But I do know that I have enough natural avoidance and natural DR to be able to live that stomp, assuming that I'm topped. So that's just something that you have to like be looking out for, is like, how much avoidance do you have? What DRs are you going to be needing for that specific pack? But overall, I do a good job of like playing my part for this, maintaining Starfall on AoE. It's not like it's not like the most important thing for you to be full AoEing that trash pack, especially whenever we do have like a mage and a serve hunter that will be able to get it killed off. Whereas like the giant there is by far the most dangerous mob, and being able to save my group at least one stomp is a huge benefit to us. And even still, I'm not even doing like bad damage. Obviously, I'm not doing fire mage damage on that pull because I wasn't like full AoEing, but the damage that I was able to output while mostly single targeting is pretty nice, or like at least doing priority damage. I don't even want to call it single targeting, but it's doing priority damage. So from here, you know, this is what we call a no cooldown pack, where I will be battling mightily versus the tank. And so what I'm going to be looking to do here is just making sure that like if any fish sticks go off, that's actually super important. This Scalebinder mob, hold on, pause for a second. This Scalebinder mob is the one that does the fish stick cast, and you can knock it. I will occasionally knock them if like I have it emphasized in big wigs to pop up in the middle of my screen if like the fish stick cast is going off, and if there needs to be a knock on that fish stick, I at any point can knock that. Obviously, I knock these mobs a little bit early, not for the fish stick cast specifically, but just to try to get them like away from the rest of our party, and so like it's actually fine. And then we're utilizing things like chastise, we're utilizing things like asphyxiate, dragon's breath, that kind of thing to stop the fish stick casts. I am saving my trees here. I am actually pressing them like right now, and the reason that I would press my trees right now, so like whenever you're playing with the Death Knight, just in general, I guess this is a good rule of thumb. I track actually all of his defense. I do track like his defensive, so you can see his like dancing rune weapon is up like right here. Did I go forward? I accidentally went forward a little bit. So I do track all of his defensives like here, and so one of the biggest things is like if you see their dancing rune weapon is falling, especially if like the pack is not over, that then is normally like a great time to trees. It's difficult on Sanguine because you actually may end up sanguining the mobs, but I think that that's like something that's like pretty nice to look out for, is just tracking your DK tank or like any tank's defensive. So for Prot Warrior, I track their block. For Guardian Druid, I track their Iron First stacks. For Prot Paladin, I track like their Shield of the Righteous, that kind of thing. For Brewmaster Monk, I track their Fort Brew and stuff like that, but since a lot of their damage mitigation is like through stagger and it's like passive damage mitigation, it's not always like that relevant. I do track like their Fort Brew and things like that though. But learning like when you should be looking to press the trees ability, because it's one of the most broken abilities in the game, that's actually really important, because just like utilization of that ability at the right time is very nice. And so like you see me there spending it while he doesn't have his dancing rune weapon up. He's able to farm that back with his forset. And so, while he's not getting meleeed, so he's not going to farm it back as fast, he is going to be able to get that back up like in pretty short time. Okay, so then after that, we like it's important to note that we have like CDs come back up. There is a question of like, should I have launched them at the end of that pack? I think just in general, your cooldowns as a Moonkin are going to last 50 plus seconds in a lot of situations. So like burning them on a pack that's like half dead is normally pretty sus. So I'm going to wait here. I'm going to pre-use the Orb of Torment and just make sure that I get like everything set up here. And so something that I'm actually doing a little bit different in this pull is I'm getting a bunch of dots out. So I'm getting Sunfire out. I've already applied Twin Moons to a few targets. I think that like in Sims, you're asked to apply Twin Moons to more targets than what I did here. But I don't think that like slamming Moonfire on this many targets is really going to be that beneficial, especially whenever there's this high target count. And so you can see at the bottom left-hand corner of my screen, basically the whole entire time at this amount of target count, my weak aura for which filler I'm supposed to be pressing is showing Starfire the whole entire time. That means that Starfire is going to be the highest DPET spell for me. And so like here sometimes I will press a Star Surge, especially if I'm like really high on Astral Power. I can press a couple of Star Surges. But in general, especially with Twin Moons, you want to make sure that you have Starfall up 100% with 100% uptime. And I actually do a pretty poor job of even maintaining that there. So I actually let it drop for like 3 or 4 seconds. And that's something that I am still learning as well, is like I have gaps in my Starfall even still, because it's like it takes some time to just kind of get used to playing with Twin Moons as opposed to Stellar Drift. So with Stellar Drift, like obviously there's like there's obviously the cooldown, but with Twin Moons, I just need to make sure that I have 100% uptime. Starfall does Pandemic, and so that's also fine. But here, now I'm just like mashing Starfire as much as possible. Starfire is like a very important ability, especially whenever you're playing Soul of the Forest on this kind of pack. So I hope that reasoning kind of makes sense for like what I was doing with my CDs there. But basically, I'm just trying to get them burned as fast as possible, and then maintaining and like greeting Ravenous Frenzy and like optimal Rav uses, and that's something that I'm like really looking to do here, is like you want to be pressing your Ravenous Frenzy as often as possible, but you also kind of want to be greeting the uses to like have the best dump with your cooldowns as possible. And so what that means is like on AoE, you want to make sure that you're maintaining Starfall, and what that means on like single target is you want to be dumping all of your Astral Power into Star Surge. Okay. We have this next pull here, And like this pull, again, this is like another cooldown pack. I actually really like this route for how it's set up for my CDs. And so this is actually something that's like really nice to talk about. I'm immediately going into this pack, making sure to moonfire everything with Twin Moons. And then once the pack kind of gets grouped up, then I'm looking to apply Sunfire to everything. Generally, I don't want to apply Sunfire too early, so I don't have to press Sunfire twice. I would rather press it like as my third or fourth global in the pack after I have everything moonfired up, because like the Twin Moons has like a 15-yard range that it can spread. So something with these Shell Crushers is you actually want to be dispelling the enrage off the Wave Jumpers. I'm like basically on a hierarchy spamming my Soothe on CD just to make sure that we're not in danger. They're not going to kill me. Like I have enough avoidance. I have enough physical damage mitigation. Like these Wave Jumpers are not going to do anything dangerous to me, even if they are enraged. But to my Clothies, you know, they may caught them. They may kill our priest outright. It just kind of depends. Our priest is very undergeared. Something like 280 item level. So having to play around that a little bit is also something like of note. You just need to be kind of careful with that kind of thing. Okay, now we have our Zul'gamux pull. I feel like at least this season having cooldowns for Zul'gamux is very high priority. Just Celestial Alignment plus Ravenous Frenzy is one of the best buttons in the game, and the amount of pressure that you can put onto Zul'gamux is very, very high. And so I'm actually doing something kind of similar to what you saw with the Giant, where I'm not actually dotting up all of these mobs because I know they'll die to somebody else, but instead I'm prioing down Zul'gamux. I'm not really focusing on dotting or AoEing. I am going to maintain a Starfall for a large majority of this pack. I want to back this back up. I am going to maintain a Starfall for a large majority of this pack, but that's just because it's relatively efficient in global usage relative to the mobs here. And we do want the mobs to die. I'm not like super concerned about but I'm not like super concerned about AoEing. So I'm still going to be firing Wraths and Star Surges like a pretty high priority into Zul'gamux. I do want to maintain a Starfall ideally, but if it drops, it's not like the end of the world. And you're going to see me like the end of my ramp, instead of just like petering out, like still maintaining a Starfall, I'm going to be dumping like all of my Astral Power into Star Surges to pressure Zul'gamux's HP down further. Another thing, so if you haven't been playing a ton, or you maybe don't have this button bound, these bats are beasts, and so you can actually hibernate them. I hibernated during my ramp here. This sucks. Like obviously, you should be calling for somebody else to CC this thing. Like you really want like a Chastise, or you really want like a Fear, a Dragon's Breath, literally anything else that's not you pressing your button during your Ravenous Frenzy ramp. I end up pressing hibernate here. I don't know why. It's because like actually I do know why. It's like largely because it's in melee, but I probably should have just called for somebody else to be cool to be CCing it instead. So this Blood Siphon is actually ending here, and so you see like I'm pretty high on Astral Power, and I'm going to be dumping as much of Astral Power as possible. I actually don't even do like that great of a dump. I should have started dumping like 1 second in advance, and that's something that like it's difficult to kind of get used to is with trees. You need to start dumping a little bit earlier than you would necessarily dump in raid, because you do also have like a 20 Astral Power injection just with trees if you're utilizing them during your the end of your Ravenous Frenzy burn. But you see me there, I'm making sure to like maintain Starfall, but at the same point, a large amount of my damage is just like sitting here with these Star Surges into Zul'gamux, because I know that this is the most important mob in the pack, and that like the Survival Hunter and the Fire Mage are going to end up killing off the Fishmancers and the Wave Jumpers. If that's kind of your role in these keys, is to bring a large amount of burst, single target damage, and to do just an absolute ass ton of boss damage. So like priority damage and boss damage are going to be your two main focuses as Balanced Druid, at least this season. And if you want my opinion, Moonkin, not that bad this season even. Like it's not the best, it's not like the best AoE, and it's not going to perform the best in overall damage, but it has a lot of usefulness, and it feels like a pretty solid tier 2 specialization. Like kind of sitting there with like Fury Warrior, Havoc DH, I guess that's where I kind of put that. So now we're just sitting here through Zul'gamux. Our healer ended up dying, so I'm going to end up popping Heart of the Wild and healing us through the next Blood Siphon. And so like you see I do run that Heart of the Wild. I use it sometimes. It's one of those things that like it's very niche in its uses, but I get a pretty good use here just because of our healer dying. And so then I'm able to like keep us topped up. We're not We're not using any cots. I'm able to keep myself relatively healthy. More often than not, I actually end up utilizing Heart of the Wild to like keep myself healthy. And so like I'll pop it at random and then just like at points where I'll cast regrowths into myself, or like I would cast regrowths into myself, I just kind of slam a couple there just to make sure that I'm getting some value out of it in a dungeon. More often than not, it's kind of like an oh shit button. Okay, I'm going to skip through Zul'gamux. There's not really much left to say about that mob. Something that's important here, if you're trying to stealth through these mobs with Prowl, you have to like walk straight down the middle. Like it is, like you have to go like straight through the middle here. And even still, like these mobs will like turn and look at you. But like you have to be walking like in the dead center, otherwise you're going to pull them. That can become problematic because then you can rip your other teammates out of stealth. But you need to just really make sure that you are aggressively walking like straight down the middle, otherwise you can cause problems. This is obviously more important with things like camouflage. Camouflage is like an awful ability, and it actually pulls those mobs pretty much every single time. But with Prowl, it's not something that like you can absolutely get through this pack with Prowl. You just need to make sure that you're hugging dead center. And if you don't feel comfortable doing it, there's nothing wrong with utilizing like an invisibility potion there. It just really depends. I use invis pots frequently in like upper Kara to get past the pyromancers at the end of the staircase before the chess event, because I found that like while I can get through there with Prowl sometimes, it's very inconsistent. And so like it's not worth doing. Oh, I haven't. Oh my gosh, okay, I was about to say that was an atrocious ramp, but it actually ended up being pretty good. So kind of similar to like the Giant and the Zul'gamux ramp, I'm not sitting here really worried about like these Purifier, like doing damage to these Purifiers, or like the Infiltrator that we have left alive, because I know that they can just die passively. I am like maintaining Starfall and like cleaving them somewhat, but I'm not full AoEing. Like I'm going to be casting Wrath as my primary builder during Celestial Alignment, that kind of thing, because I know that boss damage is the most important thing here. And so now I'm going to be depositing this orb. Just reading chat. Like this is like reading the chat box, trying to see where this orb is going. And so here we have the Infiltrator at 40% HP. Like there is a question of whether or not we kill the Infiltrator or kill Hildebrand. I know like Frosty, our tank here, he's going to be doing a great job of being able to stay alive through this Infiltrator. And so we're going to have basically no issues killing off like this Infiltrator after the fact. He's not really in danger of dying to it, so there's no real point of killing it. So basically the call is just to hit the boss here. And so like I'm going to be maintaining Starfall. It's probably Pad, if I'm going to be honest with you guys. There's no real reason to be maintaining Starfall here on this Infiltrator, because like we're not really in danger of it like hurting us. It would be nice for it to die, but I don't want to dump like single target globals into it. And so maintaining Starfall just while the Infiltrator is up is not great. Maintaining Starfall while the Purifiers are out is probably fine. And so you see me actually just casting Moonfire on them. I even trees the Infiltrator. So something that is of note here is like treesing the Infiltrator is normally fine, but like what is it? So you see this button right here. You don't want to be treesing the Infiltrator whenever the DK has AMS available to them. And so like here, I know that this Infiltrator will be casting its heal eventually. Our DK does not have anti-magic shell. So with AMS, like you fully negate the heal from the mob. But like if you overwrite that with trees, like trees basically have no DR or whatever. And so it's basically going to get a full heal. I just said basically a bunch. It's going to get a full heal. And it's one of those things that you have to really be worried about if you press trees at a wrong time, that the Infiltrator is going to be healing more than is absolutely necessary. Okay, so the only thing that's, I guess, left to talk about on this boss is like I guess there's not really much left to talk about on this boss. We do have cooldowns coming up in 55 seconds. Our Lust is off cooldown. I know that we are going to be looking to Lust the pack after this boss because we played together a little bit, so I generally have a good knowledge of the route. And so saving my CDs for the pull that's after this first boss is going to be beneficial. In addition to that, like, even if I rip my CDs, I guess it would be like with the boss is like 5%. It wouldn't even make sense because My cooldowns aren't going to be up before that, but even still, it's not going to save us an additional phase. So that's kind of how you have to view this boss, is like, how much time is this realistically going to save us? If somehow it's going to save us one of the purification phases and save us something in the order of like 45 seconds, then maybe ripping my CDs would be valuable. But utilizing them there, it just wouldn't make any sense. So like, they have come up, but like, say the boss is going to live 20 more seconds, it still wouldn't make sense, assuming that we're going to get the same number of up phases and not get an additional purification phase. If we are going to get an additional purification phase, that's a group by group basis conversation, and that's something that you have to really think about. It's time efficient, but it's really bad for your DPS. So Make your own decisions, is what I would say with that. I would generally press it just for time efficiency purposes, but I'm also doing like a 27, so time kind of matters sometimes. All right, so something I do here is my first global out of cat stealth is I'm immediately setting up my Orb of Torment cast, and now I'm sitting here just like blasting AoE on this pack. Most of the mobs need to die relatively evenly in this pull, so it doesn't necessarily matter which mob I'm targeting. And so this is basically a full AoE ramp, and I'm mashing Starfire every single global. I do something that's super smart here, and I want the astral power from the trees for my dump, but I don't want to be taunting the mobs because they're starting to get pretty low on Sanguine. And so I drop the trees behind me because I want the AP. So the trees are going to walk in and start meleeing mobs, but I don't end up like taunting them with the trees to allow the deckhands to heal from Sanguine, because our tank is looking to kite. I don't get like a perfect dump, so I don't dump all of my astral power in Star Surges. I should have dumped a little bit more in Star Surges. Instead, I elect to go for another Starfire. I'm not exactly sure what's the highest DPS there. I think that probably slamming all of my Star Surges in the Infiltrator is going to be my best bet there. At least dumping all of the AP, I suspect, is going to be the highest DPS. I'm not 100% sure there in that situation specifically, but I think that like I could have had a better ramp towards the end. Is more my point. Okay, and so now we're back to these cooldown packs where I'm doing no DPS. That last pack, by the way, I did pretty good damage on. I was over 100k DPS, and now we're going to be battling the tank again, doing 20k DPS on a 4-mob pull, maybe even less, 15k. Pog. But on pulls like these, I really focus on utilizing like my CC and utilizing my Druid kit, and just trying to help progress the dungeon in any meaningful way possible. So I'm going to be using stuff like Solar Beam at this point to just make sure that these Tide Sages casts are going to be going off as infrequently as possible on our tank with like the Brackish Bolt and whatnot. In addition to that, like, you can beam like the Officer casts, but in reality, it's not like the Tide Sages cast, but in reality, it's not like the end of the world. You do want to kick them at some point, and you do see we end up like using all of our kicks just because they're mostly free, so you don't want them free casting, and like lockout duration is kind of important on these, but they're assuming they're not just perma free casting, these mobs are mostly fine. And so focusing on like Sanguine management here, I actually do a really bad job. I should have positioned a little bit better. How you want to knock mobs whenever it is like Sanguine is you want to be looking where your DK is walking. So this is our tank right here, and so I should position myself either like here or here probably, and either knock them this direction or this direction. But instead I knock them this way across, like almost away from where our tank is going. And so then the mobs are gonna have to walk back through Sanguine to get to our tank. And so he has to immediately mass grip. That's a bad knock, by the way. And it's just something that you have to think about whenever you're playing around with Sanguine. It's not the easiest thing to do. I'm still not good at it after having done keys for, I've played with Sanguine for probably five years now, and I'm still not, it's not something that I'm thinking of all the time. Like, I notice the Sanguine drops and I'm like, oh snap, I need to be knocking here. But it's not like I'm pre-positioning myself in a way that has to happen, which I should be doing. In reality, it's not great. Okay, so this pack, I mean, there's not a lot going on here. There's a question of like, which mob are you focusing? And it's like generally going to be the deckhand in a pull like this. I'm going to be maintaining AoE. I'm actually going to be full AoEing as much as possible, and then like dumping any extra Star Surges in the deckhand because they have 1.25x the HP of the rest of the pack. And so it just makes sense for you to be doing a little bit more damage to the deckhand since they're going to be living the longest. Okay, now you have the boss. And this is actually a great boss for Moonkin. just because of like we're playing Fire Mage Balance, which kills bosses unbelievably fast, and I rip all of my offensive CDs on pull here, and we're going to be able to get this boss killed off in something in the range of, it's probably going to be less than 2 minutes that we're able to get this boss killed. Maybe around 2 minutes where we're going to be able to get this boss killed off in, because we have such strong CDs. There is a question of whether or not I should be getting Power Infusion here. Generally, I would say like on some bosses, it's really nice to give Power Infusion to your Moonkin. I do think that like for big bust with a mage, it makes a little bit more sense to be giving it to him, especially if he does have his like, oh gosh, what's it called? Sigil. If he has a sigil available, it normally makes a little bit more sense to give it to the mage because of how much cooldown reduction they get on their combustion, especially with like Sun King's Blessing and Kindling and how long they're able to maintain combust for. It normally makes a little bit more sense to be giving it to them. But I do think on bosses, balance is a very valid target on bosses that you're not lusting to get Power Infusion, or for specific phases that you want to be burning a boss a large amount or nobody else has cooldowns. Moonkin really good at getting PI in those situations. It's normally like a second or third option for Power Infusion, but it is a very strong option to be getting PI. It's not like you're a rogue or something like that. And in some situations, it is the best choice just to be able to get your group through difficult phases of fights. And look at this, Coattail already dead. And we were actually doing a great job. Like our mage is doing a lot of damage. Moonkin is normally top damage in this boss, but our mage somehow, I don't know, Mr. Pepe La doing infinite damn on this encounter. We were talking about it after the dungeon. I do not know how he did over 20k DPS on this boss. We were able to push this boss so fast because of how much damage he was able to do. Because even when we were doing like 25s and 26s, he was doing like 16 to 18k, but in this we have like a 215 kill time, and he's doing 20k DPS, and I end up at like 18, which is a lot, by the way. Like 18k DPS is a substantial amount. I should have talked about this earlier. It's always haste from the bounty. I'm sorry if it took you 26 minutes in and you're just sitting there like, but what bounty did you take? It's always haste. It's always haste. It's never mastery. Mastery gives like stat DR. But that's one of the reasons that Moonkin's actually pretty good this season, is because like the haste bounty, it gives us a lot of damage. Okay, so I'm like 35 seconds off my CDs. It's like this pack can be pretty scary. You see, I'm going to immediately start ripping my cooldowns here. The stars, I'm actually going to back up a little bit because I kind of want to talk through this pack. How you're looking to be doing this pack is you are 100% on the pulsars. Moonkin is one of the better classes in the game at just like generalized target swapping, and so you're going to be pumping as much damage as you can into these pulsars, popping Barkskin on sight if a pulsar is spawning. And then you see my cooldowns are coming up in this. I know that we're liable to chain pull a lot of these packs, especially if I am in my CDs, but I know that like these packs are very deadly, especially this pull in particular since our hunter died. And so I'm going to be looking to kick Reinvigorate with Solar Beam. That's basically how I use Solar Beam. The Rift Cast is normally going to get stopped by either our Mage or our Death Knight. And my main priority here is to Solar Beam the Reinvigorate healing casts. And so if I see like two of them going off at once, I just end up slamming my beam into that. And this is another instance of, instead of me electing to AoE on my ramp, I honestly think that this was a little bit of a mistake. I think that instead of like full dumping single target, I could have done a better job, I think, of AoEing more. But this is such a difficult pull, and like I end up having to spend so much astral power in just pressing Star Surge that I elect to just dump all of my AP into the Starseer there, and then I'll maintain a Starfall later, as opposed to maintaining a Starfall through my ramp. There is a world where you're supposed to maintain, like I think that it is definitely higher DPS to be maintaining a Starfall through your ramp, and I'm not even sure what's the best situation there, but for survivability's sake, like we know that our timer is fine, and assuming that we get through that Starseer, that's the only thing that really matters. At that moment in time is just making sure that we get through that Starseer, and so I'm there just pumping as many Star Surges as possible into that mob, and really, really, really just making sure that it's getting killed off as fast as possible, because like an additional 2 pulsars or something like that puts us in a lot more stress because of the amount of outgoing damage that those pulsars do. In addition to that, I'm like looking at the timer, and I know that I could have elected to it doesn't make sense for me to elect to hold my CDs whenever the timer is at like 8.5 minutes. So once you start getting close to the end of the timer, you have to think about how many more sets of CDs am I going to get, and you really want to optimize for that. So this happens a lot more whenever you're like the 7-minute mark and you see that your CDs are up. You should almost always like rip them on cooldown from then on out, because you know you're only going to be getting like 3 more sets or whatever, 4 more sets. Like that like sub 10-minute mark is when you should be actually looking at how many more sets you're going to get for the remainder of the key, as opposed to trying to optimize them on the front end. And this route that we're playing is just super optimal for my cooldowns just by design. So it's nice like that. I don't try to route around CDs generally. I just try to make my cooldowns retrofit into where the difficult parts of the dungeon are. And that's kind of how I feel that Moonkin CDs are best used this season, is instead of like people routing around you like they need to do in season 2, trying to make sure that your cooldowns instead retrofit to how the dungeon just functions on a base level. Okay, so for here, it's just the Starseer again. We need to make sure that we are doing as much damage as possible to the Pulsars. Bark Skin is on site. Every single time a Pulsar spawns, if I have Bark Skin available, it is pressed immediately. But beyond that, there's not really much going on here. I'm going to be fast forwarding a little bit so we can get through this. And so you see I have 5 minutes left on the timer. We're mostly fine here. I'm pre-Orb of Tormenting. I've even built up a lot of Astral Power, and I was kind of sandbagging at the end to make sure that I didn't proc my Pulsar. So I'm sitting at 290 on my Pulsar, so I'm able to get this right off the rip as well. I'm even going to cap Astral Power here to get an additional Fury Balloon, so I'm having just infinite Astral Power going into this ramp, because I know that like if I ramp well on this boss, we're not lusting in P1. We end up lusting on my CDs in the last phase. But I know that like a strong ramp in P1 allows us to only have 1 collapsing energy, and even in some situations it allows us to only have 1 set of ads come out. And I'm bursting 50k DPS on this boss. And this is the advantage of having 14 stacks of this haste buff. You just absolutely blast off. In addition to that, you see in the bottom left here, my weak aura is asking me to cast Starfire. And so that weak aura, especially once you start to get at high haste levels with this haste bounty, it's going to tell you to swap which of your fillers to be casting. And that also kind of happens whenever you have things like Bloodlust available to you, or Bloodlust rolling. And in addition to that, if you ever have PI, it's going to be asking you to cast Starfire just because of GCD floor and Astral Power per second cast gains and stuff like that. For the Assassins, I like to press Ursul's Vortex for the first set of Assassins, and that forces them to get gripped back in immediately. And it allows your melee to just do a little bit more damage to them. Oh, but something to note about that weak aura as well is I don't always take it at face value, so it kind of just depends on what damage I'm looking for. So for like this boss, it's a little bit complicated, because like if you have assassins out, it's almost always going to tell you to Starfire, because it's prioritizing like even cleave on the assassins. But I don't really care to do damage to the assassins, so a lot of the times I'm just going to like single target ramp, even though in theory there's a world where it's supposed to be like a Starfire just for single target ramp because of how much haste I have. So it's like really difficult for me to tell. I hope that makes sense. I doubt that makes sense. But it's one of those things that sometimes you have to go against the weak aura if you're looking to do priority damage, and instead just cast Wrath. Because like if there are like mobs that are not relevant to you doing damage to, and it's telling you to cast Starfire because it's factoring in those 4 mobs or whatever, you would instead just do nothing, right? Like you would instead just Wrath the boss. So we're saving our lust here. And this is due to the fact that like Vendor Moonkin CDs, I don't need them the moment we come out of this phase, but I do want them at some point whenever we come out of this phase. And so like I'm sitting here, it's 38 seconds before my CDs are available, and I'm chilling here with them up. Like we're gonna burn lust like almost the moment we come out of here, but like it's not something that I am overly worried about having for the full duration of my CDs. It would be nice, but having them halfway for my CDs and just having it on pull for like the the mage and the hunter cooldowns to make sure that they're not having to hold them any longer is really nice. And so I'm gonna like try to get a little bit higher on Astral Power. I'm also gonna pre-font because I'm trying to maximize the amount of time that I'm spending with my cooldowns inside of Bloodlust. And so like I'm gonna be pre-fonting that just to make sure that we're also getting, because I want this burn to end right as the right around where the boss is going to be phasing. And with that, like we want to be missing an intermission phase because it saves us a large amount of time. And so our Soleah kill time is going to be something like super fast. World first Soleah kill in terms of speed was like 326 on that boss. I didn't even get a full ramp off, and I was still at like almost 22k DPS. But yeah, I ended up at 28.8k overall, which is relatively high for Moonkin. Gambit is a dungeon that does a lot of AoE damage, but it normally revolves around ramp timings and making sure that you are getting very strong ramps. It's difficult to play around, and I would say that like if you're asking me, do I think that night phase is viable? I think that once you start getting past like 20s, it's really hard to stay competitive damage-wise with like a Venthyr Moonkin, but Venthyr is incredibly punishing, and if you don't play it well, then you're going to be running into problems. But whenever you're able to reap the benefits of it, you saw how I was utilizing my Venthyr ramps. I got a lot of value out of most of those ramps and was able to do competitive amounts of damage. Okay, that's gonna be it for me today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys enjoy this type of videos. If you do, make sure you leave a comment, like the video as well. It'll encourage me to make more of them, and I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.